Hi, I'm Scott Wynn. Welcome to my shop. Today we're going to make a shooting board. These are two that I've used. This one for over 20 years, almost every day of work. Another one a little bit longer. These are 90 degrees. The shooting board is one of the most important appliances or fixtures that you can use in the shop. I kind of ignored its importance for a long time, but I had a project where I was fitting glass stops in a multi-light door. And despite my best efforts of having accurate mullions on the door and accurate stops for the stops or cutting the stops, they repeatedly were off just a little bit. And then taking those stops over to the cutoff saw and trying to get off a 64th, a 100th, a half a hundredth of an inch to get the stops to go off, and walking back to the table where the door was on and back and forth and getting mediocre results at best was very frustrating. And I expressed this to my uncle, who wrote me back and gave me a little drawing. This basically resulted in this shooting board, which is for shooting 45s. Moldings, it's two ways for various moldings, and it worked beautifully. I could take a very fine shaving off the end of a miter and take this over to where the door was on the table, set it on the table or carefully set it on the door, work right next to where I wanted to fit the pieces, take a stroke or two, check, another stroke, and it goes in almost airtight. And it's just beautiful. It's so time-saving. So here we have an example of the use of the 45-degree shooting board. Simple device, pretty much described from my uncle's drawing. Base of plywood, quarter-inch piece of hardboard to elevate the work so that this side of the plane bears and provides a guidance for the cut, and a 45-degree block in the middle going two different directions. The original drawing had it with hardwood. I did it in particle board, hoping for a little less expansion and contraction, which will throw the angle off slightly, though there's ways to compensate for that, and you can use that to your advantage. So these have been fitted. I just fitted this one, but you'll notice if you really want a nice fit, we've got a little gap there, and we can get this out. If you check it, it's not quite, it's just slightly off, and this is the cutoff saw, little twist of the hand on the cut going down, a little strain of the blade throws slight variation. So we're going to trim that, see if we can close that gap. We could do a little bit more. And the other thing you can do, if especially the carpentry work, much less in furniture, you can actually pull that off a little bit one way or another and change the angle. You can place the piece a certain distance and cut one part more than the other. Pretty much closed up. This one too long. Let's see how that goes. Definitely too long. Let's do this one to make sure it's square, or 45 actually. we go. We could finesse that a little bit, but you get the idea. Nice and snug, no overcuts. You don't have to have your fingers behind the blade of the cut-off saw within inches of the blade angle over towards your hand. Much safer too. So it's interesting, this piece is very tight. If I was doing stain grade, I would really want to close these up a little bit more. This piece fit almost loosely when it's in there by itself, and just these two pieces are in there. But the knife edge of that miter actually cuts in there a little bit, extends it, so when you bring the last pieces in, this is just probably a little too tight. And the 90-degree shooting board can be used for in a similar way. A lot of times you have a piece in between two pieces. You really got to get that nice and snug. Get it close, a few strokes on the, and you get a nice airtight fit like that. So, and in addition, the shooting board is really great for drawer parts. So you stick your drawer into the pocket and mark its length. You can trim it to a length. Get a smooth and square end. Measure the height to go into the pocket. You can plane it down to the height. And if you put a shorter stop on the back, you can use it for planing the sides of the drawers. Okay, so what do you do when you've got a face miter along the edge of a wide board? Obviously, this is not going to work, nor is there a plane wide enough to do that. Traditionally, there was a number of solutions. One of them is called donkey, in which large and elaborate, and it had to be clamped or fit between the dogs. The board was held at a 45-degree angle so that you could plane that miter flat. This had its problems because it limited the length of the board, plus it was pretty ungainly. So an easy solution is to just make a shooting board where the ramp is at 45 degrees. So we'll take these, this is off the miter saw, and you can imagine maybe it's too long, and in this case it's definitely acute quite a bit. So we'll see if we can correct that. The plane rides on this ramp. It's focus on keeping it flat on there. And you can see the cut widening here, and it's on the thin edge, which is where we want it. Now we're the full width. Let's see if we made enough progress. Theoretically, we should be halfway there. And not quite. Work on the other one. And we've actually overcompensated ever so slightly. So there is user input. So you can put pressure more on one side or the other. Fudge the plane position a little bit. So we're gonna, you can see that cutting on the top there. We don't want to do too much. I may have already taken too much. Yeah, we're good. Okay. Okay, so what happens if you've got an angle other than 45? Well, you can make up shooting board according to what angles you need. Octagonal, for instance, triangle, hexagonal. These are little shooting boards, quick and dirty, for different projects requiring different angles. And you can do them in, you know, as many as you need for as many projects as you need. Or not. So there's basically two types of shooting board. This is the first type, possibly now the more common. It's the bench hook type. The difference between this and a bench hook is it actually has this ramp. So a bench hook could function as a shooting board just by placing the plane on the bench top. The second type, it's a little less common now, but used traditionally in many woodworking cultures, is a shooting board. And this is one way to shoot an edge for like edge joining boards for tabletop. The board was placed on here and basically held, or you could clamp it. And the plane was run along here to shoot the edge. And that's how you would shoot the edge. By putting a stop up here at the end, this can also be used for squaring up ends. Much like that. The difficulty I find is just what you can see here. We've got support issues and we've got length issues. If you're doing bigger pieces or carpentry work, you can have a 16-foot piece, and this is going to be difficult. This particular one I have here, I use for edge joining veneers by placing a stack of veneers in between here. There we go. In between, and then clamping it down. A couple clamps here, and then I can straighten up the edges of the veneer. And also this makes a worktop for cutting the veneer, saving a lot of wear and tear on my bench. Okay, it's no excuse not to have a shooting board. You can make one up in less than an hour for sure. Plywood base, hardboard preferably, could be MDF, and then a stop. Nail or screw it together, glue it, and you're good to go. Make a square cut on that piece of masonite and butt the stop up to it, you're square. It has a few disadvantages, but it works fine. If you're using it a lot, every day, if your work requires that, you'll find that that stop wears eventually, and sometimes with some wobble of the plane when you use it, it gets a little chewed up. So eventually you're going to have to replace this. If it's glued on there, basically you're going to have to make another one. If it's screwed on there, it's probably going to shift. I find even glued and screwed tend to shift over time, and so it's nice to have adjustability on the stop. So years ago I developed a shooting board, and it seemed like overkill initially when I thought of it, dovetailing the battens in there when you can make one this quickly. But this one I made around 1997, and I use it almost every day. The advantage of this is that with this stop is on a tapered dovetail. So the more I drive it this way, the tighter it goes. If the end of this stop gets chewed up, gets out of square, is no longer supporting the work, the wood has some compressibility, I can probably tap it down just a little more and freshen up that end and get a nice fresh end, sharp edge here to support the work. If this goes out a square, either to the base or to the shooting edge, this can be tapped out, and this can be tapering shavings with a plane, can square that back up without affecting the squareness of the piece. So, and if eventually you've reached full compressibility on the wood, you can tap that back out, take a single or two shavings with a plane off the back, and because this is tapered, that will advance the batten. So this is a renewable shooting board. Should last you a long time. The ramp, in this case, is sloped. The reason for that is if you're doing a lot of thin wood, it virtually burns the blade. The heat from focusing that narrow edge on the blade dulls it quite deeply. You have to sharpen the blade back quite a bit to get rid of that, basically a nick in the blade. So by angling the ramp, you can avoid putting pressure and heat on one single spot on the blade and spread the wear out. You can also do that by shimming up the work. So you can put the piece on a shim and use it now a different part of the blade. The disadvantage to the sloping ramp is you're losing some width in the cut because this is dropped down now. So it depends on the nature of your work. If you're doing a lot of thin work, you might want to have this ramp. You can make the board thicker, even much thicker, and get a steeper angle, a little more shear on that. So the criteria for designing and dimensioning your shooting board is this area here, basically your minimum area, or if you're not doing a sloping ramp, this amount here basically should be no less than this amount. This part of the plane is what rides on the wood and keeps everything square. The blade cuts everything beyond there, but this doesn't cut. You can't use a rabbet plane on this because the rabbet plane continually shave the side of the ramp as well as the work. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is that from the ramp to the top of the stop should be equal to the side of the plane to the side of the blade. You can make it less. If you make it more, it's a little problematic because above there it doesn't get cut with the plane. Sometimes the plane tends to hang up. And then finally, if you're doing a sloped ramp, the height of your stop should come to about here or less. And that's your basic criteria. Now, for a smaller plane like this, and actually even for some of the bigger planes, shooting more than about an inch and an eighth is not that easy to do, not that common, and unless you're doing big work, I wouldn't necessarily anticipate using a shooting board for work that thick.